When 20-year-old Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura wrote his final letter to his mother in October 1944, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of duty that would cost him everything. Tomorrow, he would pilot his Zero fighter directly into an American warship, becoming one of the legendary Kamikaze warriors. But the secret he carried would reveal why these young men chose death over dishonor. Could you make such an ultimate sacrifice for your beliefs? The cherry blossoms had fallen early that year at the Chirin Air Base in southern Japan, their pink petals scattered across the runway like tears from heaven. Hiroshi stood at his barracks window, watching mechanics prepare his Mitsubishi A60M0 for what the Japanese called a special attack mission. The plane looked no different from any other fighter aircraft, except for the 550-pound bomb strapped beneath his belly. A bomb that would never be dropped, only delivered with the pilot still at the controls. At 20, Hiroshi was older than many of the Kamikaze volunteers. Some of the boys preparing for their final flights were barely 18, their faces still bearing the softness of childhood despite the steel in their eyes. They came from farms and cities across Japan, united by a code of honor that seemed incomprehensible to their American enemies, but made perfect sense within their cultural framework. The previous night, the squadron had gathered for their traditional farewell ceremony. Each pilot had received a 1,000-stitch belt, sewn by Japanese women as a symbol of protection and good fortune. They had drunk sake, sung patriotic songs, and written their final letters home. Some had laughed and joked, hiding their fears behind forced bravado. Others had sat silently, lost in private thoughts about families they would never see again. What these young men didn't fully understand was that their sacrifice was born from desperation rather than strategic wisdom, a last gambit by leaders who had already lost the war. Could you maintain such composure, knowing that sunrise would bring your certain death? Hiroshi's path to this moment had begun 2 years earlier at the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy. He had been one of the most promising pilots in his class, with natural flying skills and an instinctive understanding of aerial combat. His instructors had predicted a brilliant career, perhaps rising to become a squadron commander or even an ace pilot with multiple victories. But the war had turned against Japan faster than anyone had imagined. The crushing defeats at Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippine Sea had decimated the experienced pilot corps that had dominated the Pacific in 1941 and 1942. By 1944, Japan faced a critical shortage of skilled aviators, while American forces seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. The Kamikaze program had emerged from this crisis as both a tactical innovation and a psychological weapon. Japanese military leaders believed that the fanatical determination of suicide attacks would inflict such heavy losses on the American fleet that the United States would negotiate a peace settlement rather than continue the costly advance toward the Japanese home islands. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the architect of the Kamikaze strategy, had personally visited Chirin Air Base to address the volunteer pilots. His words had been carefully chosen to appeal to their sense of duty and sacrifice. "Gentlemen," Onishi had said, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority, "Japan faces its darkest hour. The enemy surrounds us with overwhelming numbers, but we possess something they cannot match: the spirit of Yamato, the willingness to die for our emperor and our homeland. Your sacrifice will not be in vain. Each of you will take dozens of enemies with you to the afterlife." But the real shock came when Hiroshi discovered the true condition of Japan's war effort. During a classified briefing reserved for squadron leaders, Hiroshi had learned information that shattered his understanding of the war's progress. Japan's industrial capacity was collapsing under Allied bombing. Food shortages were becoming critical in major cities. Most devastating of all, the Imperial Navy had lost nearly all of its experienced carrier pilots and most of its major warships. The kamikaze attacks, presented as a path to victory, were actually a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable while Japan's leaders searched for any possible way to avoid complete national destruction. The young pilots volunteering for suicide missions were being sacrificed to buy time for negotiations that may never come. This knowledge created a terrible moral burden for Hiroshi. He could continue believing in the propaganda that portrayed kamikaze attacks as Japan's path to victory, or he could accept the reality that his death would likely accomplish nothing more than adding his name to a growing list of casualties. Yet despite this devastating revelation, Hiroshi chose to proceed with his mission. His decision wasn't based on blind loyalty or military indoctrination, but on a deeper understanding of duty and sacrifice that transcended tactical considerations. What would you choose when faced with such impossible knowledge? Die for a hopeless cause or abandon your comrades in their darkest hour? The night before his final mission, Hiroshi visited the base shrine where many pilots went to pray before their special attacks. The small wooden structure was dedicated to the spirits of fallen aviators, and hundreds of photographs lined its walls. Young faces that would never age, dreams that would never be fulfilled. Among the photographs was his best friend, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, who had died 3 weeks earlier in an attack on American ships near Leyte Gulf. Kenji had been like a brother to Hiroshi since their academy days, and his loss had hit harder than any military defeat. They had promised each other that whoever survived the war would visit the other's family and tell them stories of their service together. Now, Hiroshi would be joining Kenji in death, leaving no one to fulfill that promise. As he knelt before the shrine, Hiroshi reflected on the letters he had received from home. His mother's latest message had been filled with pride about his military service, but also with subtle hints about the hardships facing civilians. Food was becoming scarce, and American bombing raids were reaching previously safe areas. His younger sister, Michiko, had been evacuated from Tokyo to their grandmother's farm in the countryside. The weight of these personal connections made his upcoming sacrifice even more meaningful. He wasn't dying just for abstract concepts like emperor and empire, but for specific people he loved who needed protection from the advancing enemy forces. Wait a moment. What personal revelation would give Hiroshi the strength to face impossible odds? That evening, Hiroshi received a letter that had been delayed in the military postal system for over a month. It was from Michiko, his 15-year-old sister, written in the careful characters she had learned in school. "Dear brother," the letter began, "I hope this reaches you safely. Grandmother's village was bombed last week, and many people died. But the strangest thing happened afterward. American soldiers came to help with the wounded, and they were not the monsters we had been told about. One of them, a medic, spoke some Japanese. He told us that America doesn't want to destroy Japan, only to end the war. I don't understand politics, but I thought you should know." The letter continued with details about daily life and family news, but Hiroshi kept returning to Michiko's observation about the American soldiers. If his sister's account was accurate, it suggested that the enemy possessed more humanity than Japanese propaganda had acknowledged. This revelation didn't change Hiroshi's determination to complete his mission, but it added another layer of complexity to his understanding of the war. Perhaps his sacrifice would honor his duty while also contributing to an end to the conflict that would spare other families the losses his own had experienced. Could you find peace in such contradictory knowledge when facing your final hours? The pre-dawn hours of the mission brought an unexpected ritual that would stay with Hiroshi forever. Flight Commander Sato gathered the pilots in a circle and asked each man to share one memory that represented what they were dying to protect. The stories were heartbreaking in their simplicity. Lieutenant Tanaka spoke of teaching his little brother to fly kites. Ensign Watanabe described his mother's smile when he graduated from flight school. Sergeant Hayashi remembered fishing with his grandfather in a mountain stream that seemed impossibly peaceful compared to their current situation. When Hiroshi's turn came, he thought of the cherry blossom festival he had attended with Michiko just before reporting for military service. They had walked beneath the flowering trees, talking about her dreams of becoming a teacher and his hopes of serving honorably in the Navy. The memories seemed to contain everything worth preserving about Japanese culture and family bonds. I fight for the possibility that someday, children would again be able to walk beneath cherry blossoms without fear, whether they are Japanese children or American children. Peace is worth dying for, he said quietly. His words surprised himself, but they felt true in a way that military slogans and propaganda never had. The other pilots nodded respectfully, understanding that Hiroshi had articulated something important about their shared sacrifice. They were not dying out of hatred for the enemy, but out of love for what they hoped to preserve. Unbelievable as it seems, the most dangerous part of the mission would come from their own emotions, rather than enemy fire. As the 12 Zeros lifted off from Chirin Air Base at dawn, Hiroshi felt a strange sense of calm descend over him. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him for weeks had been replaced by a crystalline clarity of purpose. He was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what honor demanded. The flight to the target area took 2 hours, flying low over the Pacific to avoid detection by American radar. Hiroshi marveled at the beauty of the ocean below, its surface painted gold by the rising sun. It seemed impossible that such a peaceful scene would soon become a battlefield. As they approached the coordinates where the Intrepid was reported to be operating, Hiroshi spotted the American fleet spread across the horizon like a metal city floating on the waves. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers stretched as far as the eye could see, their anti-aircraft guns already tracking toward the approaching Japanese aircraft. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent. This was the power that had pushed Japanese forces back across the Pacific, the industrial might of a nation that could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. Attacking such a force with 12 obsolete fighters seemed like madness, but it was the kind of magnificent madness that had defined Japanese warrior culture for centuries. Flight Commander Sato's voice crackled over the radio. "All aircraft, select your targets and attack independently. May your deaths bring honor to the Emperor and victory to Japan." What followed was the longest 5 minutes in military aviation history. American fighter planes rose to meet the kamikaze attack like angry hornets. F-6F Hellcats, faster and more maneuverable than the aging Zeros, tore into the Japanese formation with devastating effectiveness. Within minutes, half of Hiroshi's squadron had been shot down in the ocean in balls of flame and smoke. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky with deadly black bursts of shrapnel. The noise was overwhelming. The engines, the chatter of machine guns, the crash of exploding shells. Hiroshi's Zero shook constantly from near misses, and he could smell smoke entering his cockpit from damaged systems. Through the chaos, he could see the Intrepid growing larger in his windscreen. The massive carrier was turning hard to starboard, trying to present a smaller target while its gun crews poured fire into the attacking aircraft. The flight deck was covered with parked planes, fuel lines, and maintenance equipment, a perfect target for a suicide attack. But as Hiroshi entered his final dive toward the carrier, something unexpected happened. An American Hellcat pilot, instead of shooting him down, pulled alongside his Zero and flew in formation with him for several seconds. Through his canopy, Hiroshi could see the American pilot's face, young, determined, but also somehow sad. The American pilot raised his hand in what could only be interpreted as a salute, then peeled away to let Hiroshi complete his attack run. It was a gesture of respect between warriors that transcended nationality and ideology. Yet, could such a moment of human connection survive the violence that was about to follow? Hiroshi's Zero struck the Intrepid's flight deck at over 300 miles per hour, his 550-pound bomb exploding on impact and sending a column of fire and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion destroyed several parked aircraft and killed dozens of American sailors, but it did not sink the mighty carrier. As consciousness faded, Hiroshi's final thoughts were not of emperor or empire, but of cherry blossoms and the possibility that someday children from all nations might walk beneath flowering trees without fear. His sacrifice had been offered not in hatred, but in hope for a better world that his death might somehow help create. A USS Intrepid survived Hiroshi's attack and continued fighting until the end of the war. But the courage displayed by both the Japanese kamikaze pilots and the American defenders became part of a larger story about honor, duty, and the terrible cost of human conflict. And then decades later, the truth about these brave young men would finally be understood. In the years following World War II, historians and survivors from both sides began to piece together a more complete understanding of the kamikaze phenomenon. What emerged was a complex picture of young men caught between impossible duties and devastating circumstances. Many kamikaze pilots, it was discovered, had harbored private doubts about their missions while maintaining outward displays of enthusiasm and loyalty. Their letters home, released decades later by families, revealed deep thinking about war, duty, and sacrifice that contradicted simplistic portrayals of fanatical warriors eager for death. The American sailors who survived kamikaze attacks often spoke with respect for the courage of their attackers, even while acknowledging the terror and destruction these attacks had caused. Admiral William Bull Halsey, who commanded many of the fleet actions against kamikaze attacks, later wrote, "The Japanese pilot who dove his plane into one of our ships was as brave as any man who ever lived." Perhaps most importantly, the kamikaze phenomenon revealed the universal human capacity for self-sacrifice when individuals believe their deaths might protect something precious to them. Whether Japanese pilots diving onto American ships or American soldiers advancing against impossible odds, the willingness to die for others represents one of humanity's most profound and tragic qualities. Could you understand such sacrifice even when directed against your own forces? The memorial at Chiron Air Base, where Hiroshi and thousands of other young pilots began their final missions, now serves as a museum dedicated to peace rather than war. Visitors from around the world come to read the last letters of kamikaze pilots and to contemplate the human cost of military conflict.
These letters reveal young men who were remarkably similar to soldiers from any nation. They missed their families, worried about loved ones at home, and struggled to understand their place in events larger than themselves. Some expressed doubts about the war's direction, others reaffirmed their loyalty to Japan, but almost all demonstrated a mature understanding of duty and sacrifice that belied their youth. One of Hiroshi's fellow pilots, Lieutenant Ichiro Hayashi, wrote to his parents, "Do not mourn for me, For I go gladly to my death, knowing that my sacrifice might spare you and my younger brothers the horrors of invasion. If my death helps end this war sooner, then it will have served a purpose greater than my individual life." These words, multiplied across thousands of similar letters, paint a picture of young men who chose death, not out of fanaticism or hatred, but from a profound sense of responsibility to protect those they loved. The tragedy of the kamikaze attacks was not that they revealed the evil of Japanese militarism, but that they demonstrated how war can pervert the highest human virtues, courage, loyalty, and self-sacrifice, into instruments of mutual destruction. What lessons can we learn from these young men who chose to die for their beliefs? Today, the story of pilots like Hiroshi Nakamura serves as a reminder that even in warfare's darkest moments, individual human beings can maintain their dignity and humanity. The kamikaze pilots were neither demons nor gods, but young men faced with impossible choices who tried to act according to their understanding of honor and duty. Their sacrifice, while ultimately futile in military terms, demonstrated qualities that transcend national boundaries and historical circumstances. The willingness to place others' welfare above one's own survival, the determination to face death with composure, and the ability to find meaning in suffering are universal human capabilities that deserve respect, even when channeled toward tragic ends. The American sailors who survived kamikaze attacks went on to build the peaceful world that pilots like Hiroshi Nakamura had dreamed of in their final letters. The cherry blossoms still bloom in Japan each spring, and children from many nations can walk beneath flowering trees without fear of war. Perhaps this is the most fitting memorial to the young men who chose death in the hope that their sacrifice might contribute to a better future. Their graves are scattered across the Pacific Ocean, but their legacy lives on in the peaceful world their deaths helped create. The kamikaze phenomenon ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, but the questions it raised about duty, sacrifice, and the cost of war continue to resonate today. In understanding these young pilots' motivations and experiences, we gain insight into some of the most profound aspects of human nature, both its capacity for nobility and its susceptibility to tragic miscalculation. Would you have found the same courage in the face of such overwhelming circumstances, knowing that your death might be meaningless, but your duty was absolute? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to explore more stories about the human cost of war and the enduring power of individual courage.